Tiger King, Murder, Mayhem and Madness, titled on-screen as simply Tiger King, is a 2020 American true crime documentary streaming television miniseries about the life of zookeeper and convicted felon Joe Exotic. It was released on Netflix on March 20, 2020. The series focuses on the small but deeply interconnected society of big cat conservationists such as Carol Baskin, owner of Big Cat Rescue, and collectors such as Exotic, whom Baskin accuses of abusing and exploiting wild animals. The series received positive reviews from critics, and according to Nielsen ratings, was watched by 34.3 million people over its first 10 days of release, ranking as one of Netflix's most successful releases to date, partly due to its release amid the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also inspired several memes online. Despite its success and popularity, the series and its filmmakers have received criticism from conservation and animal rights groups for its framing and inaccuracies related to private breeding and wildlife conservation issues. A special after-show hosted by Joel McHale was released on April 12, 2020, with McHale interviewing several of the stars about Exotic and the series itself. Summary: the series explores the deeply interconnected community of big cat conservationists and collectors in America, and the private zoos and animal sanctuaries they have set up for the care and public display of these animals. The series' primary subject is Tiger King Joe Exotic, the eccentric owner of the GW Zoo in Wynwood, Oklahoma, and follows his bitter years-long feud with Carol Baskin, CEO of Big Cat Rescue in Tampa, Florida. Baskin presents herself as an animal rights activist, whose mission is to provide a sanctuary for big cats raised in captivity and combat the exploitative trade of big cats. However, Exotic maintains that she is simply a rival zookeeper, whose aim is to eliminate fellow big cat enthusiasts, characterized by Exotic as her competition. The two exchange threatening videos, legal allegations, protests, and targeted harassment campaigns, in which PETA and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service become involved. Exotic alleges that Baskin murdered her second husband Don Lewis, who has been missing since August 18, 1997, and makes public death threats towards Baskin. Exotic's personal life is featured as a subject of interest throughout the documentary, particularly his unofficial three-way same-sex marriage to Travis Maldonado and John Finlay, and his subsequent relationship with future husband Dylan Passage. His 2016 run for President of the United States and 2018 run for Governor of Oklahoma are documented with the assistance of his campaign manager, Joshua Dial. Producer Rick Kirkham recounts the rise and fall of Joe Exotic TV, a podcast-like production that Kirkham hoped to develop into a TV series, before his footage was mysteriously destroyed. The series later records the events leading up to Exotic's conviction under federal murder-for-hire statutes. When it comes to light that he paid a hitman to murder Baskin, his convictions also included violations of the Lacey Act and Endangered Species Act, and resulted in a 22-year federal prison sentence. Other characters from the exotic animal community are introduced, including Bhagavan Antal, an animal breeder accused of leading a personality cult, Mario Tabrau, a former drug lord who became a federal informant and is now involved in animal trafficking, Jeff Lowe, a Las Vegas playboy to whom Exotic turns over his zoo for legal reasons, and James Garretson, who became a confidential informant for the federal government and a key figure in making the case against Exotic. Former GW Zoo employees such as manager John Reinke and animal wrangler Kelsey Safari conclude the series by commenting that the animals themselves were forgotten amongst all the interpersonal fighting, and that no party has truly come out victorious. Episodes. Subjects. Reception. Critical response on review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes. The series holds an approval rating of 89% based on 75 reviews, with an average rating of 7.88/10. The site's critic consensus reads, A bizarre true crime story you have to see to believe. Tiger King is a messy and captivating portrait of obsession gone terribly wrong. On Metacritic, which assigns a weighted average score to reviews from mainstream publications, the series has an average score of 75 out of 100, based on 13 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Variety magazine's Caroline Framke called the series messy yet compelling, and that for those who love Netflix's particular flavor of true crime and docuseries, Tiger King will undoubtedly scratch a particular itch. Joshua Rivera at The Verge said that every minute of Tiger King yields some new surprise, an unbelievable turn, or charismatic stranger with incredible stories to tell. Although the series has a positive reception overall, the special after-show hosted by Mikhail has received criticism. Audience viewership. According to Nielsen, the series was watched by 34.3 million people over its first 10 days of release, ranking as one of Netflix's most successful releases to date. It has been suggested that its viewership success was aided by the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused many global viewers to be restricted to their homes around the time of its release. At their Q2 report meeting in July 2020, Netflix reported the series had been viewed by 64 million households over its first month of release. At an April press conference regarding COVID-19, then President Donald Trump was questioned about the possibility of pardoning the series' key subject, Joe Exotic. In January 2021, prior to the inauguration of Joe Biden, Trump pardoned several different people, but Exotic wasn't one of them. Exotic tweeted that he was too innocent and too gay to receive a pardon from Trump. Criticism for depiction of conservation issues. Animal welfare groups, conservation organizations and wildlife biologists have criticized this series and its filmmakers. Several conservation and animal rights groups criticized the filmmakers for framing private big cat breeding as a legitimate form of conservation. Representatives from Wildlife Conservation Society, Worldwide Fund for Nature, Pantera Corporation and National Geographic criticized the show for its equivocation of the unregulated private breeding with captive breeding for species reintroduction, highlighting that the latter is strictly controlled by the species survival plan and only takes place in zoos accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Privately bred cats cannot be reintroduced to the wild, as several of the private breeders interviewed suggested, as they would be unlikely to survive in the wild, and are likely hybrids which could cause genetic pollution. The filmmakers were also criticized for implying that roadside zoo operations are as legitimate as accredited zoos, and big cat rescues specifically. The series and director have suggested big cat rescues and closures are small or do not meet ethical standards, but their facilities meet humane standards set out by Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. Elle noted that Baskin was portrayed as hypocritical for keeping the tigers in captivity instead of releasing them, without explaining that doing so was not an option. Being captive bred from mixed stock, as well as in effect domesticated, meant they were unsuited to either survive in the wild or rebuild regional populations. Michael Weber, director of The Elephant in the Living Room, also criticized the parallels drawn between the private zoos and big cat rescue. The series was also accused of minimizing Baskin's efforts to lobby Congress for stricter legislation on animal trafficking. Good brings to Tiger King the intellectual rigor and social responsibility of a nightclub and hotel developer, Peter Frick-Wright, who had produced Cat People, a podcast series covering the American big cat industry, wrote in Outside. He found the series particularly unfair to Baskin, pointing out that in focusing on her husband's disappearance so much it failed to distinguish her from Exotic and Antle, barely mentioning that Big Cat Rescue only accepts tigers confiscated by law enforcement or from owners who could no longer handle them, owners who had to sign a contract with heavy financial penalties if they owned another big cat or were even photographed with one, a proviso not mentioned in the series. Baskin also forbids volunteers or staff from touching the animals. They are fired for doing so. Frick-Wright wrote. Others criticized the sympathetic portrayal of Joe Exotic, The director of Animals Asia Foundation expressed disappointment that the Netflix series does not fully condemn many of the activities that Exotic was involved with and criticized the filmmakers for downplaying the animal cruelty and commercial purposes of Exotic Zoo. Conversely, Baskin is the only source in the series from the conservation sector, and the only source explaining why keeping the wild animals was abusive, but is depicted in an unsympathetic light. Some criticism noted the lack of clear environmental or conservation message. An article in the New York Times drew parallels with other recent wildlife films like Blackfish, which had a major impact on their subject matter. Blackfish led to a severe drop in ticket sales at SeaWorld and reduced support for cetaceans in captivity, eventually leading to changes in legislation and practices. The producer of Blackfish criticized Tiger King, saying that issues surrounding big cats were lost in the show's soap opera esque drama. Carl Amon, a photographer and documentarian specializing in the illegal wildlife trade who was approached to be interviewed by the filmmakers of Tiger King, similarly expressed disappointment at the lack of conservation message in the series, saying, "To totally ignore such key aspects was a real missed opportunity." PETA and the Humane Society of the United States, both of which had previously investigated and campaigned against the animal abuse of Exotic and other private breeders featured in the show, responded more positively to Tiger King for raising the profile of the issue of big cats in captivity. However, PETA noted the series largely skips over serious issues of animal welfare, including the horrors of cub trafficking and the problems with commercial cub petting attractions. Accusations of misogyny. The Independent's Kathleen Walsh posited that the show's treatment of, and the public reaction to, Baskin has been misogynistic. The series provides example after example of Exotic's violence, cruelty, and narcissism, while the evidence against Baskin, compelling enough as it is framed in the series, is circumstantial. Maybe Baskin did kill her husband, and the third episode of the series is devoted to the evidence pointing to this conclusion, but so far there is little more than speculation to say that she did. Meanwhile, the series shows clips from Exotic's erstwhile YouTube series in which he poses alongside a blow-up doll, Baskin in effigy, shoving the dildo into its mouth and shooting it in the head. Awards and nominations. Response from those depicted. Joe Exotic is the main focus of the series, with the documentary causing him to receive significant amounts of attention on social media. Ironically, despite the series being responsible for his worldwide fame and fan base, he has not watched the series himself, due to being arrested prior to its release. Nevertheless, Netflix interviewed Exotic in jail, asking what he thinks of both the series and his newfound fame. Exotic stated that he loved the fame, but wished he could experience it firsthand. He also expressed remorse for his actions after being in jail, stating to his fans, "Go sit in a cage with your animals for a week. I mean, when I left the zoo and I sent my chimpanzees to the sanctuary in Florida and imagined what my chimpanzees went through for 18 years, I'm ashamed of myself." Exotic added that he's done with the Carole Baskin saga. In 2021, he began criticizing some of the other people featured in the documentary, stating that not one person came forward until the Netflix series came out and they could profit from it. Carole Baskin and her husband Howard felt betrayed by filmmakers, stating she was told the discussion of Joe Exotic and Baskin's missing husband were just for context. In a post on the Big Cat Rescue website, Baskin said that the show has a segment in the third episode devoted to suggesting, with lies and innuendos from people who are not credible, that I had a role in the disappearance of my husband Don 21 years ago and that the series presents this without any regard for the truth. Baskin has never been charged with anything related to Don's disappearance and has always denied having anything to do with it. In partial response to Baskin, director Good stated while he felt Baskin had the right intention, he questioned if it was fair to keep these tigers in cages, adding that the tigers pace neurotically, and that, sometimes you wonder whether or not one should humanely euthanize these cats instead of letting them suffer in cages. Baskin preemptively answered that, "Our goal is to end having them in cages and have no need for a sanctuary like ours. Our federal bill, the Big Cat Public Safety Act, would stop the cub petting that drives the breeding and end ownership as pets in backyards." In addition, Good and Chikland insisted that Baskin wasn't coerced into answering questions about her former husband. In February 2021, Baskin revealed that she had been asked to feature in a planned second season of the show, but she refused and told the producers to lose her number. Doc Antle was disappointed with his portrayal in the series, calling it a train wreck of entertainment and salacious. Antle said in an interview that he was not told that the series would be about the bitter feud between Baskin and Exotic, and said that he would have preferred to be left out of it. "This is not a documentary. This is a salacious, outrageous ride through a television show produced to create drama, to just tie you into some crazy train wreck of a story between the feud of Carole Baskin and Joe Exotic." Questions about Carole and Joe were a dozen or so thrown into hundreds of others, and I repeatedly told them, "I have no desire to be involved in some show where you got the feud of Carole and Joe going on. It's not my thing. Leave me out of it." Kelsey Safari. Hawaii-born Safari, a veteran who served in both the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, worked as a manager for Joe Exotic's Greater Wynwood Exotic Animal Park for almost 10 years. In 2013, the then 27-year-old was bitten by one of the tigers as she mistakenly put her arm into its cage, and opted to have an amputation of her left forearm and return to work within a week, instead of undergoing a 2-year series of surgeries. She is hoping to get a prosthetic as of March 2020. In 2018, Safari disconnected from the zoo and everyone involved. Following the release of the Netflix series, Robert Moore, the creator of an earlier podcast about Joe Exotic, posted a tweet stating, "Saf, the person who got mauled by the tiger, told me repeatedly that he is trans, prefers to be called Saf, and uses he/him pronouns. So please do likewise." Media outlets criticized the series for misgendering and dead-naming Safari. LGBTQ Nation contrasted Netflix treatment of Safari with their recent collaboration with GLAAD, an LGBTQ media watchdog group, on a campaign raising transgender visibility in the entertainment industry. Safari clarified to Esquire, "On a daily basis, I am called 17 different things. I never really took it to heart." For context, my conversation with Rob was that he asked me, "What do you prefer? Saf or Kelsey?" And of course, I said Saf because that's what I've been called for the past 20 years. I was in the army prior to the park and they always use last names. So, Saf was my preferred name. And I've always gone by him since I could say that out loud. My family was always very supportive. It was never an issue." Regarding whether she identified as a trans man, Safari stated to Out magazine, "I don't know that that describes me. You know, nothing was done. I really just have lived this lifestyle. And, you know, my family knows this. And obviously, people closest to me know. This is how I've lived my entire life. I don't know anything else." Celebrities as a result of the show. Multiple sportspeople who had previously owned exotic pets were questioned about their actions. Retired boxer Mike Tyson said that he was foolish and wrong to have kept 2 tigers in his home in the 1990s. Retired professional basketball player Shaquille O'Neal, who appears in the show saying he bought 2 tigers from Joe Exotic, said in an interview after the show's release that he had never had any business dealings with him. Subsequent media a limited series adaptation is in development, headed by Universal Content Productions. It will be based on a podcast Joe Exotic, Tiger King by the writer Robert Moore, with Kate McKinnon set to executive produce and portray Carol Baskin. The series is expected to air on NBC, Peacock, and USA Network. A limited series titled Joe Exotic, Tigers, Lies and Cover-Up premiered on September 27, 2020 on Investigation Discovery. A TV special titled Joe Exotic, Before He Was King premiered on September 28, 2020. On April 8, 2020, Deadline Hollywood reported that Ryan Murphy is in talks to produce a film or limited series for Netflix with Rob Lowe starring as Joe Exotic. On May 4, 2020, Variety reported that Nicolas Cage had been cast to portray Exotic in an 8-episode television series based on a Texas Monthly article about Exotic. The series is produced by Imagine Entertainment and CBS Television Studios, and Dan Lagano will serve as writer, showrunner, and executive producer. In September 2020, it was announced that the series had officially been picked up for development at Amazon Prime Video. On April 5, 2021, British documentary filmmaker Louis Theroux released a new documentary on Exotic, titled Shooting Joe Exotic, on BBC Two in the United Kingdom. The documentary contained unseen footage of Exotic from a previous documentary by Theroux, America's Most Dangerous Pets, 2011, as well as new interviews of other people associated with Exotic, including Exotic's legal team and Howard and Carol Baskin. See also America's Most Dangerous Pets Joe Exotic Carol Baskin documentary Greater Wynwood Exotic Animal Park Big Cat Rescue. References. External links Tiger King on Netflix Tiger King at IMDb